At the height of the Roman Empire, where power was contested between swords and conspiracies, one man rose to the throne and turned his rule into a theater of horror and delusions. Caligula, shaped by the brutality of the very system that created him, did not merely survive the betrayals that decimated his family. He learned to weaponize them against his enemies. With a mix of cunning, cruelty, and an obsession with being worshipped as a god, he turned Rome upside down, challenging senators, humiliating generals, and ruling with absolute disdain for any boundaries. But how did a young man, raised in an environment of fear and distrust, manage to use that darkness to his advantage? This is not a story shaped by fiction or exaggerated by time. Historians like Suetonius and Tacitus have meticulously recorded the years of terror under Caligula's rule, an emperor whose madness and cruelty defied even Rome's brutal standards. Every detail of his rise and fall has been documented, revealing a reign where reality surpassed legend. Rome prided itself on order, discipline, and eternal glory. But all of that unraveled when one man proved that the empire was nothing more than an illusion, sustained by fear. Caligula, shaped by the brutality of the very system that consumed his family, did not just seize the throne. He transformed it into a stage where every subject was forced to applaud or die. In the Senate, the most powerful men of Rome knelt before a mad tyrant who treated them as puppets in a grotesque spectacle. Soldiers, who once fought for honor, now obeyed senseless orders, fearing that a single suspicious glance could mean their execution. In the imperial court, forced laughter echoed through the gilded halls as courtiers pretended to understand jokes they dared not question, praying that the next wave of madness would not fall upon them. In the 1st century AD, Rome was an unstoppable empire, ruling territories across the known world. Yet, within its own walls, it was rotting from the inside, corroded by betrayals, political disputes, and a power vacuum left by an absent emperor. Tiberius, isolated in his fortress on the island of Capri, ruled with paranoia and distrust, while those around his court plotted in silence for succession. And in this chaos, a young man, scarred by the blood of his family and shaped by the need to survive, emerged. Caligula would not simply inherit a throne, he would claim Rome for himself. To do that, he had to prove that no one was more worthy of absolute power. And the only way to do that was to crush anyone who dared to challenge his authority. Fear rules better than any law, he believed. And Rome would soon learn that lesson in the worst possible way. Caligula was not born to be an emperor. He was forged through pain and vengeance. Orphaned of his father, he watched as his mother was humiliated and his brothers were murdered under Tiberius's rule. He grew up surrounded by intrigue, manipulation, and constant fear, learning that in Rome, trust was a weakness and mercy was a death sentence. But he never forgot. He never forgave. When Tiberius died, the succession was not handed to him alone. The former emperor had named Tiberius Gemellus as co-heir. But Caligula had no intention of sharing power. He knew that to rule Rome, it was not enough to receive a title. He had to seize it, crushing anyone who dared to claim his place. And that is exactly what he did. The halls of the imperial palace were not just adorned with gold and marble. They were drenched in conspiracy. The Senate, now an assembly of men weakened by submission, still posed a threat, as some dreamed of restoring balance to Rome. But Caligula did not face only whispering politicians. Some military legions remained loyal to Tiberius and viewed the young emperor with suspicion. At his side, Naevius Sutorius Macro, the head of the Praetorian Guard, ensured that his reign began without resistance. Yet, loyalty in Rome was fleeting, and any ally could become an enemy overnight. Absolute power was his, but Rome was an insatiable beast, and the throne he sat upon was as unstable as the mind that occupied it. Caligula knew that as long as Tiberius Gemellus lived, his throne would never be secure. But he was not foolish enough to simply order his execution. Rome adored the illusion of stability. So he played the long game, pretending generosity, treating Gemellus as a brother, granting him honors, and giving the Senate the impression that they would rule together. The senators, still uncertain about the new leadership, watched cautiously, waiting to see if the young emperor could be controlled or if he would be another tyrant to fall. But Caligula did not share power. When the moment was right, he revealed his true face, accusing Gemellus of conspiring against him, manipulating the circumstances until his rival had no choice but to take his own life. With that, the last obstacle to his absolute rule was eliminated. Now, with the entire empire in his hands, Caligula turned his attention to another issue: succession. Convinced that he needed a strong and worthy heir to secure his legacy, he defied all notions of morality and attempted to impregnate his own sisters, Drusilla, Julia, and Agrippina. To him, the gods had granted him the right to create a successor pure and free from the corruption of common men. But this obsession with dynastic immortality, combined with his increasingly erratic actions, only fueled further suspicions about his sanity. The Senate feared his unpredictable behavior, and whispers of conspiracy grew louder in the halls of power. If he wanted to solidify his position before a rebellion could be planned, Caligula needed to do more than just rule. He needed to terrorize Rome until no one dared to question him. The Senate, long accustomed to manipulating fragile emperors, finally realized that Caligula was no ordinary ruler. He did not just want power, he wanted worship. What had once seemed like mere eccentricity now took a far more dangerous form when the emperor declared himself a living god, demanding that statues of him be erected in temples and that citizens worship him as a deity. The senators, reduced to mere spectators of his madness, were forced to flatter him under threat of death, kneeling before the man who now saw himself as something greater than mortal men. But Caligula was not content with being worshipped. He wanted to erase any remnants of the old order. He executed nobles for sport, held feasts where guests could be killed at any moment, and turned the empire into a stage where only he dictated the rules. Rome was no longer governed by reason, but by the unpredictability of a man who saw his own insanity as entertainment. However, Caligula's power game did not spare even his most loyal allies. Macro, the head of the Praetorian Guard who had ensured his rise to the throne, went from ally to threat. Accused of treason without evidence, he was dragged to his death without even a trial. With his execution, Caligula further consolidated his rule, but he also exposed the fragility of his own paranoia. He no longer trusted anyone, yet he demanded absolute obedience. His world became a cycle of fear and blood, where a single wrong expression, a single suspicious glance, could mean death. But the more he ruled through fear, the more he awakened the hatred of those around him. And in Rome, no tyrant reigned forever. The Senate, once the heart of Roman politics, was now merely a submissive shadow before Caligula's insanity. No man dared to challenge him openly, for those who tried were humiliated or exterminated without hesitation. His power was absolute. He did not rule with laws or political strategies, he ruled through chaos. The more unpredictable he became, the harder it was for his enemies to plan against him. He kept the empire under his grip through fear, creating a reality where anyone could be the next to fall. But this strategy came at a cost. Rome was no longer stable. The empire's former glory was crumbling under the weight of his erratic rule, while legions and senators, even in silence, began to wonder how long this madness could last. Caligula had proven that absolute power did not require logic, only fear. But Rome, once grand and organized, was now trapped in the chaos of one man's delusions. And as long as he breathed, Rome's fate belonged to him alone. If you love epic and real stories filled with betrayals, battles, and characters who changed the course of history, then this is the channel for you. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming narratives about the darkest and most fascinating moments of the Middle Ages and the ancient world. And if you enjoyed this story, leave a like. It helps the channel grow and motivates us to bring even more legendary content to you. See you in the next chapter of history.